Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, sponsored by MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Barntime Productions at barntimemusic.com, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to healthy dialogue around all things local policy in the North County San Diego area. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. So on today's episode, we have John Franklin. John is the current deputy mayor of Vista, and we're about 2 days, I was going to say 3 days, we're about 2 days out from Election Day. It's November 10th, Thursday, and it appears as though John is a pretty commanding lead over his opponent for the mayoral election, Cipriano Vargas. And although the votes haven't been counted, it does appear as though he's going to be able to hold on to this race. He currently has close to a 9-point advantage. So I wanted to bring in John today and sort of just talk through a few things. One, I want to talk about looking back on the campaign. I also want to talk about, if once presumably if you're elected, what your agenda will look like, sort of what you're going to be pushing in Vista, and then sort of some of the regional issues that I think that we're all familiar with and that we all think should be discussed. So I just want to start at the top. So first of all, in the race with Vargas, it was a very contentious race. I reported on some of that. There was a lot of back and forth, accusations, mudslinging, that sort of thing. But I want to get your thoughts on how the campaign went in its entirety, and if anything sort of stood out to you or was surprising to you in that way.
No, I probably expected worse than I got.
Okay.
And so I don't have any complaints really about the way that my opponent conducted himself. In fact, we didn't attack his character, who he is as a person. I focused only on what he had done with the power of the office that the people had elected him to. He's the president of the school board. When we talk about running a negative campaign, to me, attacking somebody on who they are as a person, choices they've made in their family life, these are all negative attacks. But voters want to know what we've done with the power of the office we've been elected to. For example, he made the motion and cast the deciding vote to fire school resource officers. And that was something he did with the power of the office he was elected to. And so it was, to my mind, it was highly relevant, particularly when we do spend a third of our city resources, as most cities do, on policing. And people do want to know what our position is in terms of supporting law enforcement. So to me, that was a highly relevant subject. One of the things that came out in the campaign I thought was very interesting, and I appreciated and I supported. I went a year ago in November to the school board, and I asked them, after a violent incident at the Rancho Buena Vista campus high school, I asked them to restore the school resource officers. And
Vargas.
I asked the entire school board,
Yeah.
but Vargas being the president specifically. And more than anything, I asked them to agendize a conversation about restoring the deputies so that the public could come and give their thoughts. We have a thing in California called the Brown Act, which is our state government open meeting law. It allows the citizens to be made aware of the things the government's going to discuss and to have the opportunity to come speak on those matters. One of the things I'm really disappointed in the entire school board, and I'm disappointed in our superintendent, is the agendas were muddled and they read contracts with outside agencies. That was the term that was used. I am calling them out. It is not going to be acceptable to hide the public's business to subvert the Brown Act. We have a right to know what's coming for discussion so that we as public members of the community, can engage in these discussions with our elected leaders. Our state law gives us that right. I'm upset and disappointed with the entire school board for allowing that to happen. I'm upset and disappointed with the superintendent. It's unacceptable. And I'm going to use my position as mayor to make sure, of all things, that we have public accountability, transparency. It's not okay to subvert the public meeting law. I was very upset by that because it deprived us the opportunity to go and speak and be heard, and it deprived the community. No one showed up. Now, when citizens knew 2019, November 15th, it was in the midnight hour, November 15th, 2019, when they fired the deputies. Folks knew it was going to be a topic of discussion. Teachers, students, parents showed up in large numbers to talk about the subject because they were very passionate about it, as well they should have been. But because of the way it was agendized, not a single person, not a student, not a parent, not a teacher, showed up to talk about it. That's what happens when you hide the ball as government. We need to be utilizing, as the city council now does, YouTube Live. People should have the ability to watch government meetings as they occur. That's a very simple thing. And it should be very easy to locate the minutes and the recordings of government meetings, and it should be very easy for people to participate and give feedback. So sorry to spend so much time on that, but if there's one thing we ought to all be able to agree on, it's transparency in government.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's totally relevant because, as you said, he's president of the school board. One of the big things he campaigned on was sort of what he touted as his record on the school board. So I think it's absolutely fair game to go after that a bit and give some pushback there.
And just the campaign is over, and so I'm really at this moment. We're 2 days after the election. Once you win, the mayor's office, it's sort of it hits you like I've got 4 years and I've got to do something to better my community. I don't just want the title of mayor. I want to do something that people say, Franklin did something with this office that mattered to all of us. I've discovered a lot of things about the school boards, not just in Vista, but particularly in Vista, things that are happening in the schools. And I've realized, we didn't happen to have kids. So I never paid a great amount of attention to what's happening in the schools. But this has opened my eyes. And I'm hoping that Jen Tallis is going to win her position on the Vista School Board. We need parents. We need parents with kids in our schools on the school board. It's incredibly important because no one is more engaged and more there to defend the students and the parents' interests than parents who have kids in the school district. So I'm going to support parents with kids in the school district from now on. And as mayor, I'm going to lend my voice strongly to their campaigns as long as they're, for common sense policies. I feel remorse that I have not worked harder in the past to get good people elected to the school board that really were part of the community and would stand up for the right thing, because I now see, Cipriano like to point out the school district is the 3 times larger budget than the city of Vista it is. What we do in the schools is probably is more consequential even than what we do in the city. We need really strong leaders there. I mean, they both matter, don't get me wrong, but it's one thing that's I've decided I'm going to invest more effort in going forward.
Absolutely. Well, I think that there is sort of this push from parents, not just in Vista, not just in North County, but nationally, to sort of be more involved in school board meetings, to even run for school board offices. Yeah. I think school boards have become, in a lot of ways, for better or for worse, a sort of battleground for a lot of ideological debates that are occurring across the nation. But go ahead.
And I'm sorry, but this is one of the things I learned about our schools. A young mother asked me recently, she said, I have a 1-year-old, and she said, I want to know what your honest opinion is of the schools. And I told her, I said, as mayor, I'm running to be the cheerleader for Vista. But the hard statistics are that 25% of the kids that go to Vista schools do not graduate with a high school diploma. And 50% of them cannot read at grade level, and only 1/3 are at grade level for mathematics. As a member of the community, and I would think most parents would agree with me on this, we have a lot of politics in the school. Until we have taught our kids to read, to do math, and until we have got them graduating at a much higher level than 75%, there shouldn't be anything else being taught in schools. We need to throw everything else out of the curriculum, and our kids need to be able to read. I mean, am I saying this? Am I, why am I even having to say this? Why is this even a discussion? If half the kids can't read, talk about a reason to march on the school board and march on the schools. I mean, these kids are being deprived of the opportunity to succeed in their lives because they can't read. If you can't read, you also probably don't have the ability to write successfully. reading and writing, I mean, your career and my career both absolutely underpinned by the ability to communicate. And I don't care what you do for a living, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, police officer, whatever, you need to be able to read and write in order to be successful. And I'm extremely unhappy, frustrated. I don't know what the right word is. I'm troubled that so many of our children are not, at grade level and don't have the ability to read and write. That's beyond bothersome.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so we've talked about addressing the transparency of the school board. We've talked about addressing, as you sort of put it, the dysfunction, as it were, in the schools themselves when it comes to education. But other than that, like when, assuming the election results hold and that you're elected mayor, what are your sort of day one agenda items as mayor? Like what comes first for you? Like if you have the ability to push things through, like what's kind of top of the list?
So right now, one of the things I talked a lot about, 8 years ago, I campaigned on hiring more sheriff's deputies. The city council makes a contract. The city makes a contract. The council approves it with the sheriff's department. And the sheriff's department provides the policing for the city of Vista. We actually give the title chief of police to the sheriff's captain, who is assigned to be our chief sheriff's deputy in the city of Vista. So just so that everybody knows, the city council exercises a great deal of discretion and authority about how many deputies, how the deputies are organized, and we actually have significant say about policing policies, what kind of crimes we want people, we want enforced, where we want policing to be focused on. One of the things that I really want to work on, and I'm pleased to have spent a little bit of time with our new sheriff, Kelly Martinez. I really want to focus on the booking policies in the jails. The fact is, we're really not booking people in anymore for a large number of crimes. And,
what types of crimes? Like misdemeanors?
You would be shocked to learn the short list of crimes, of egregious crimes that you must commit: rape, murder, violent assault, in order to be booked in. It's very troubling. Somebody came up with, I didn't come up with it. Somebody came up with this term, petty crime or minor crime. And there's been a movement to decriminalize or destigmatize or de-emphasize enforcement of lower level crimes. Lower level crimes, theft at a lower level, property crimes, vandalism, these are the things that destroy our quality of life. There's an open debate about the broken windows theory. Why, I don't know, because it just makes sense on its face. When you take care of the small things, the large things take care of themselves. People who are disciplined and orderly know that when you take care of the small things, look at any Marine and ask them why they make their bed in the morning and why they do it in a way that is very, detailed. It's not because in reality making your bed has anything to do with what you do, but it's about the mind frame that you're in. It's about being somebody who's disciplined. The small things do matter. They make a difference in our community. And when we show the community that we're serious about stopping the minor crimes, we show them that we're serious about the larger ones. And the small ones are easy to accumulate in large quantity and really diminish quality of life very quickly. So I would say amongst my priorities is definitely examining and bringing. We've had some direction that's been given behind the scenes. I want to make sure that our council is on record in front of the community, giving the direction. When I talk about transparency, I'm very serious about it. I want to make sure all the direction that's been given to the Sheriff's Department has been given in open session in our community. Let's have a debate about what's right. Sure. I want you there to cover it. I want you to write about it. And I want you to hold us accountable. We'll have a better governing process. And some of those policies have been set behind the scenes. We need to really focus on that.
Sure. I mean, So you talk about these quality of life crimes and
Yeah.
sort of the de-emphasis on enforcement. Do you think that's coming from the state? And if so, like, how is that played out at the local level? Like, how is this sort of overarching sense of the hands-off policy on lower level quality of life crimes? How does that affect people in Vista, North County?
An enormous effect. Vaughn's grocery store, I sent a mail piece out. It's all boarded up now. On South Santa Fe was the primary grocery store for probably, we have 98,500 people in Vista. I'm guessing probably 30,000 families shopped at that Vaughn's grocery store, and now they have no grocery store to shop at. There was no other option in South Vista.
Because of robbery. And,
yeah, I'm sorry, I should elaborate.
Yeah.
It was closed down because of shoplifting.
Yeah.
And the store manager made that very clear to us. First, they closed one of the two exits to try and have control over it. And then because so many products were walking out of the door without being paid for, they told us they were very frustrated. I mean, the manager had to lay off everybody at the store, and he knew what it meant to close that grocery store. So when we talk about what the impacts are to real people, the impact of decriminalizing these quote-unquote petty crimes, Proposition 47 was labeled the Safe Schools and Better Communities Act. It made shoplifting, it took the number from 450 to 950, what constitutes felony shoplifting. It exacerbated our shoplifting problem and a whole host of crimes that it attempted to decriminalize or move into a felony, from a felony to a misdemeanor. And the impact was closing the grocery store that a lot of people relied on.
Yeah. So, I mean, but as a city, I mean, as mayor, like, what can you do? I mean, because
Yeah,
it sounds like a lot
question.
of this is state law. So, I
Absolutely.
mean, within the confines of state law, like, what do? Do you push back on that larger level, or do you?
Well,
What can we do locally?
Yeah, it's not just the legislature. This was actually adopted by the people. But what I can do is, my opponent actually endorsed Prop 47. Mm-hmm. I was against it. I'm supporting the campaign to repeal it. What I can do is, as a leader, as a mayor, I have the platform to lead on. I was on Fox 5 the other day, and they said, well, talking about homelessness, which I know we're going to get to, they said, well, you've been on the council for 8 years. What can you do differently as mayor? And I said, well, for 8 years on the council, you never once invited me to be on the evening news. And I didn't elaborate, and I hope people understood what I meant was people want to hear what the mayor has to say. There's only one mayor for the city, and there's 4 additional members of the council. You have an opportunity to speak and be heard and to lead. When people are willing to listen to what you have to say, you have an opportunity to lead. What I can do is I can let people know that grocery store closed because of the shoplifting problem, and that if we as a city and as a council are not going to stand up to shoplifting, and if we're not going to demand that our state legislators bring that item back to the ballot so that people in California can fix it, then the problem will get worse, and people in marginal and low-income neighborhoods will have even fewer opportunities to shop close to their homes, and that will be the price that will be paid, and that's not acceptable. So what I can do is what I'm doing right now, which is sitting down with you and getting in front of as many people as possible and say, when you vote on these ballot propositions, pay close attention. When it says better schools and safe neighborhoods, be aware that we have people in our Attorney General's office who are so callous that they would title something that, eliminates crimes and makes our neighborhoods much less safe, that they would title it in that way that would be intentionally confusing to voters. So I just say this, how many elected leaders are willing to dig in and hold people accountable? We need people to speak hard truths, and we need to point some fingers here at the laws, the specific laws that are not working, and we need to people need to know where that they can focus their energy.
Where this is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely, and they know what they can do about it. What you can do about it is, if you haven't already, and I have had meetings with our state legislators, you need to call, every person listening to this needs to call their state senator and their state assembly person, and they need to demand that a repeal of Prop 47 be placed on the ballot, and they need to demand that it's given a fair title so people understand what it is. And when it comes to the ballot, people need to vote to repeal Prop 47.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I didn't know the law was framed that way, actually. That
Yeah.
it was titled, what was it?
The Safe Schools and
Safe-
Better Communities Act.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've covered Prop 47 for a while, but I didn't
Right.
realize that it kind of slipped in under that, somewhat misleading title. So I want to touch on something you mentioned. You mentioned homelessness, and I think, I bring people on here constantly to talk about homelessness, but Vista is unique, and there's sort of this perception that, Vargas, your opponent, wanted to build a new shelter, for instance.
Well, he said so.
And that's what he said. And sort of the rhetoric that I've heard from your campaign is not that you don't have new ideas, but you're sort of wanting to keep Vista on course with the current plan to tackle homelessness. So the city council, just a few notes I have here, approved the voucher program last year.
Mm-hmm.
You guys also tripled the size of your homeless resources program.
Mm-hmm.
You have more outreach workers, a homeless outreach vehicle, in addition to the motel voucher program I just mentioned, and a nearly $2 million encampment resolution grant from the state. So a lot's being done, but if for you right now, do you think that there's anything differently that the city could be doing to address this issue, or are we sort of staying on course, as it were?
Well, when you say staying on course, let's talk. This is super important, and one of the things I wanted to do through my campaign was educate people about what the city of Vista has done. I asked when we did our goal setting session it's been about 5 years ago now. I asked that we make solving the causes and symptoms of homelessness the number one priority and goal of the city of Vista. And when that came back before us 2 years later, I asked that we keep it at the top. And what came out of making that the number one goal of the city, the staff had the idea to create a plan called the Homelessness Strategic Master Plan. And the way we created that plan was we held 4 listening sessions. And I know that my colleagues support the idea, and I think we're going to go back and do those listening sessions again. We invited every citizen, every service provider to the homeless, every person that wanted to come with any ideas about how we could work to solve homelessness. We invited all of them to come and give their input. We took every single idea that came to us, and we had probably, I would guess, we had about 100 people in total participate. Most of them were, not most of them, a lot of them were involved in providing services to the homeless. And so they brought ideas about their programs. And there was only one idea that came to us we didn't implement. That one idea was purchasing a van, driving around downtown, and asking people if they wanted to, leave their belongings on the street corner, get in the van, and go to Oceanside where we had a day center. And we talked about it, and we said, has this ever been tried anywhere before? The idea that people were going to leave their things and go, it didn't really make sense. I don't want to say it was a bad idea.
Most people wouldn't be amenable to that.
Yeah, we just didn't think it would work. Yeah. And so, but what we did do is we wound up taking that idea to get that van, and this was one of my ideas, was the social worker that we hired was driving people around in her own Toyota Camry. And I said, my goodness, why doesn't she have a city vehicle that's safe, reliable? COVID was still very much active. And I said, she should have a COVID barrier so she can put people in it, not worry about that. And some of these folks have severe mental illness. Some of them are high on drugs. And for her safety, there probably ought to be, while she's driving the vehicle, probably ought to be a barrier in the vehicle. So she ought to have an appropriate vehicle to drive folks around in to get them to the shelter. And so we did acquire that vehicle. We now have that deployed. And what started with one social worker has grown to a team of 10 social workers, housing navigators, and benefits enrollment counselors. 2 of those folks are paid for by the county out of the 10. 8 of them are paid for by the city, with about 3 of them being directly out of the city budget, and the remainder coming through some state grants that we've applied for. So appreciate the state making resources available to us. We've gone out and tried to avail ourselves of those resources. You asked me about my opponent talking about building shelters. He wanted to build shelters for children and for homeless veterans. Let's talk about both those categories for just a second. We don't have 8-year-olds living on the streets. Thank God we don't allow children to live homeless on the streets. And we also don't have shelters for children. A shelter for children would be a thing called an orphanage, or what they later called a congregate shelter for children. We don't do that anymore. We have foster care. The foster care system entirely replaced orphanages, okay? We have people who are ready to take into their homes right now a child that needs care. That's paid for. They receive payment for doing that. That's all paid for through the county and organized through the county. So we don't have orphanages. So this idea that we're going to go back to creating a shelter for children, I mean, this is, number one, we don't see any children living on the street. Number two, we don't do orphanages anywhere. So I really don't know what he was talking about. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say it's not really what he meant. But if he was talking about families with children, we already have Operation Hope and Solutions for Change, both operating with city support, both operating inside the city of Vista. They accept families with children. So, he never really fleshed that idea out, but it just honestly didn't make any sense at all.
Sure.
When he talked about building a shelter for veterans, we have had encounters with 289 separate individuals on the streets of Vista. I mentioned the 10 social workers. We used to go out and do a thing called the point-in-time count. We still do it. I did it this last year. I got up at 4 a.m, went out and counted people that were living on the street. The point-in-time count is a very rudimentary way to count people living homeless in your city, because you only are able to count those people that you encounter at 4 a.m. It really doesn't make sense, because for a city like Vista, where we have social workers who are making multiple contacts, an average of 7 each, with the people living on our streets, we are documenting who these individuals are. We are learning everything about them and what the drivers are of their individual causes of homelessness. So when you go out and conduct this count, it's like we already have this extremely detailed information on every single person. So for the cities that don't have social workers, the point-in-time count is a must. But for cities with social workers, we're doing something way more comprehensive than you can do in a point-in-time count.
Sure.
So we have detailed information. We know from our many outreach opportunities that only 11 of those people who are homeless on our streets have let us know that they're, and we do ask, and only 11 of them have told us that they're veterans. Every one of them has been offered shelter. Every one of them, unfortunately, has declined because they don't want to go to the shelter. Mm-hmm. They don't want to take our motel vouchers.
And I want to talk about that a bit, because that's the thing. I think that a lot of times with this conversation, we sort of reach a wall when we talk about homelessness, because it's like you can offer people care, but you can only do that a certain number of times. One thing that I've talked about with you a lot in private conversations and on the record is this idea of voluntary versus involuntary treatment.
Right.
And, the facts are, I did a little research this morning, nationally around 30 to 50% of the homeless population has a mental illness. Mm-hmm. And as much as 50% also have a co-occurring substance abuse issue.
Right.
So to address kind of the meat of the problem, like you kind of run into this wall of people aren't taking services. And so you and I have had this ongoing dialogue about involuntary and voluntary treatment, conservatorships. Mm-hmm. Conservatorship is, a situation where, an adult, oversees the comprehensive medical treatment for, somebody who's unable to, provide for themselves, who has a serious mental illness. And that's where the Lanterman Petra Short Act comes into play. And we've talked about that. But I want to sort of, for listeners and for viewers, I want you to sort of explain your position on this idea of involuntary care and why you feel so strongly about this.
Walter Vedovic is a man who lives homeless on our streets. He's been arrested 300 times. Probably last time I talked to you, I thought he'd been arrested 45 times, and I found out that was just on the last series of reports I had. I was talking to one of the deputies at we just did slushies with a deputy. One of our 7-Eleven owners hosted an event, and I was talking to the deputies there about Walter Vedovic, and he said, "Oh no," he said, "Walter's been arrested 300 times, not 45."
300 times, one dude,
one guy. And I said not to be confused with Walter Vedovic, Walter Chung is our city attorney, and I said to our city attorney, I said, I am not saying, hear me, I am not saying every person living on the streets needs to go into conservatorship, but I am saying Walter Vedovic is an example of somebody who does and would benefit. We actually have Walter over at Interfaith right now, and he's getting some help, thank God. But we have a woman it was I think it was the day before the election. I think it was Monday morning. Tried to get into the Pega's restaurant in South Santa Fe, and everybody that was dining there, I got a phone call from multiple people that were having breakfast there. Woman came in, tried to use the restroom, and they said, restrooms are for customers only. She went out right in front of the store, defecated on the sidewalk in front of the store, picked up the material, and tried to get into the store, and all the employees had to kind of physically pull on the doors to keep her out. She was trying to throw it into the restaurant, and instead she threw it at the front door and then proceeded to smear it all over the front door of the restaurant. Now, as a resident, everything else aside, politician, whatever. I mean, just as somebody who lives here, this is not okay. Mm-hmm. This is not okay. And for the family of this woman, who's obviously severely mentally ill, obviously, a high probability that she's addicted to substance. There are people that are so ill that they are not capable of a rational choice decision to choose treatment. They need it, though, and we all know they need it. And when I sit down with their mothers, and I have done this frequently, Hope Street Coalition is an organization. My friend Paul Webster, who had worked with that's right.
I used him for a series we did on this very issue.
Meeting the families and realizing and seeing the pain in their eyes and knowing how we are failing as a society to meet the needs of families whose children are homeless on our streets. When I say children, I'm talking about adults, okay? Mm-hmm. But their 24 or 30-year-old son is homeless, and we, society, won't do anything to help them access the court system. So I've been citing a number a lot. Our housing and homelessness budget for the state of California is $10.8 billion with a B. The state of California reports 116,000 homeless people to the federal government. Now, this is some back-of-the-envelope math, and I know I'm oversimplifying, but I'm oversimplifying so that I can make a point. And that point is we're spending $95,000. Now, when we say homeless, there's many categories of what constitutes being homeless. But when we really talk to our friends and neighbors who aren't in the business of government or maybe reporting on it, when we talk about homeless people, they are thinking about the people they see living on the street. These are people we call chronically homeless. They've been outside for more than 12 months. That's how we define chronically homeless. And when we talk about those people that are living on the streets, I think we could all agree, or should all be able to agree, that those are the people in the greatest way of harm. Those are the people that are in the greatest need. And those are the people that until we've solved their problem, probably we shouldn't be doing too much else to think about other categories. Because if we can't get these people off the street, we're failing so miserably that everything else we're doing. But anyway, $95,000 per person. We're spending it on shelter beds that people won't go to. So when my opponent says, let's build a shelter, I say, well, okay, let's ask a business-minded question. We bought 3,650 bed nights of shelter in the last year. In the last 18 months, I think we wound up using 73%. But in the last 6 months, we only used 43% of those bed nights. So that means those beds went vacant a substantial number of the nights that we paid for them. So with 10 social workers on the streets, don't we want to first ask ourselves what we need to do differently with our outreach in order to fill the beds we've already paid for? We have the motel voucher program. The way that works is it can be used as an inducement to get somebody off the streets. We'll get you into the motel. It's a 21-day voucher. If you're willing to go to the shelter, this can be an opportunity to, convince someone to get off the street, and then they go from the motel room to the shelter. A lot of them don't want to go to the shelter afterwards. They'll take the voucher. But particularly when we have, we did have 2 days of the year where we had our shelter was completely full. During the Santa Ana winds, most recently, it was 110 degrees out in Vista. And we had the shelter bed full, and so we put people in motels. I helped some people personally, spent all day with them on the streets, getting them into a shelter, and not getting into a shelter, into the motel voucher program. You mentioned the council authorized vouchers. Our social worker did not want to give a voucher to the people I was working with because she had run near the end of her voucher money. I called the city manager and I said, I'm really frustrated that it's really inhospitable on the, outside with this weather. These people are in our vehicle. They want to go. They've said they're going to go. And we're kind of elated when people say that they'll take us up on our offer, because we offer so many people, they decline it. When people say they'll take our help, it kind of cause for celebration. And I was really frustrated. I called the city manager. I said, what's going on here? He called the head of Exodus, and they said, well, we're running out of money. And the city manager and I, Patrick Johnson, agreed right then and there. He said, well, if you'll go to bat with your colleagues, he said, I'll use my authority and let's give her another $50,000 for vouchers. He said, if you'll back me up when it comes to council. I said, absolutely, I will. I want these people that want to get off the street to have. So it's not there. There's this whole argument about, well, we need more resources. I mean, I'm a fiscal conservative of the tallest order. I campaigned against the deficit that we were in. I'm not going to deny somebody on the street who wants to go to shelter or wants to get off the street. I'm not going to deny that person that. I literally told the social worker, I said, if you don't pay for it out of the voucher program, then I'm going to pay for these people out of my own pocket. I'm going to get them off the street whatever way I can. I mean, when you get out there and you start working with people, you're touched by their humanity, and you say, and I feel like every one of us feels that way. We're going to help people if we can.
Yeah.
And I think we're frustrated and angry about why we're not getting these people the help they need.
Sure. And I think part of that comes back to voluntary versus involuntary treatment, right? And so you've talked a bit about what we're doing here locally in Vista, but I mean, at some point, going back to the Landrum and Petra Short Act, and the standard for conservatorships. I mean, that series I did where I talked to Paul about where I interviewed the families of the homeless, like the theme that kept coming up was this idea of the threshold for getting someone in conserves, getting someone in voluntary treatment is just too high, sort of this standard of grave disability. So, I mean, is this a situation where we just really need to push hard to reform laws at the state level? Or
have you pulled the law and read the actual text of the statute that was passed in 1967 by the state legislature, signed by Governor Reagan when he was governor?
Yeah, bits and pieces.
It says, the actual statute says, if you fail to feed, clothe, or shelter yourself, that you'd be subject to a conservatorship. That would be, basically prima facie evidence that you're gravely disabled. All right? Actually, it says you're gravely disabled if you fail to feed, clothe, or shelter yourself. So if you're starving yourself to death, if you're naked because you can't, you can't or won't put clothes on, or you're homeless because you can't or won't house yourself, that you're gravely disabled. Right? This is a very clear and plain standard that every person can understand. But the definition of, your ability to, it's like, well, and this is, I think this is where they went with it, was like, well, he has the ability to shelter himself. He just chooses not to. Because, he could go to the shelter, but he's choosing not to. And this is the whole thing, is we've come to a place where we've decided that people who suffer from a fentanyl addiction or severe schizophrenia, or maybe both, we're saying they're making a choice. That's like saying an 8-year-old chooses to live in the backyard. Well, Johnny wanted to sleep in the backyard all year last year. Well, I'm sorry, we don't allow 8-year-olds to make their own decisions. Why? Because they don't have rational choice capacity. We don't allow an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient to wander around town because we know that they've lost the capacity to make a rational choice. Why then would we allow a 24-year-old who's addicted to fentanyl? We know they're not making a rational choice. So the Constitution says that you cannot be deprived of your liberty, life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It means, it's been defined nationally as a jury trial, a unanimous jury verdict. You have the right, before you're put into a conservatorship or into any involuntary treatment program, you have the right to be judged by a jury of your peers. And I when I tell people this, I say, would you, if you were on a jury, would you take someone's liberty away from them if you thought for a moment that they were making the right choices or capable of making the right choices for themselves? Or would you only, if you were a juror, would you only make that decision if you thought it was absolutely essential for this person's well-being and health? And they all say, well, of course I would only do that to someone if it was absolutely necessary. Well, of course, because we're all reasonable, rational, caring human beings. Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter. We all care about other people, and we're not going to take somebody's liberty away from them without a real solid reason to do so. You have the right to an attorney in that process to defend you in that trial. You have the right to a psychiatrist diagnosis in the state of California. That's a medical doctor. You have the right to a patient's right advocate, someone who is trained in your rights as a patient and trained to spend the time with you to make sure you have the ability to execute and stand up for yourself, in addition to your attorney, okay?
So this notion we're just stripping people of their personal liberties, it's misplaced.
The other side says that we want two guys to jump out of a panel van and drag people off to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's just false. Mm-hmm. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. Those facilities don't exist anymore. We closed them down in the 60s, and we should have, okay? There wasn't proper oversight over those facilities, and there were real systemic failures. I think we fixed a lot of the problems, and I think we know more. Mental health is not stigmatized the way it once was. I know my family, and I've come to believe that probably in reality, almost every one of us has been touched by mental illness and by substance abuse. I didn't know that when I was a younger man, but the more I learn, the more I go through life, the more I realize substance abuse is affecting us all, whether it's affected us directly or it's affecting somebody that we love. Homelessness is affecting probably at minimum the children of at least one person or a family that you know. Mm-hmm. If you really start to have this conversation, you discover how widespread the problem is. So we must protect and defend the civil rights of every human being, homeless or otherwise, mentally ill or otherwise. No one's a stronger defender of the Constitution than I am. But after we've given that opportunity to defend the civil rights of a person, the constitutional rights, if we discover that they're not capable of making good decisions for themselves and they're addicted to narcotic drugs that rewire their brain and they're suffering from other severe mental illness, then yes, I do believe that we need to involuntarily give them the treatment that they need and help them. Because I don't think it's moral to walk past them and leave them in the situation they're in, decide that they've made a choice when they're not capable of choosing.
Sure.
And so, is it 97% or 3%? I don't know. How many people living on the streets need involuntary treatment? I don't know. But I know that Walter Vedovic would benefit. Mm. I know there are people clearly who would benefit, and I know that they're not getting the help they need. And after talking to the families I know, the families are telling me that the resources in the court system are not there. So we're hiring huge numbers of outreach workers. We're paying for shelter beds that are laying empty, okay? We're building multi-million-dollar bathroom facilities on the streets of San Francisco. We're spending money right and left because
all for people who aren't accepting treatment.
That's right. Yeah. And so when are we going to say, hey, some of these things are really good things to do that we're spending money on, and we should keep doing them, but maybe we need to divert some of those resources into helping people. And then here's something else that I have recently come across. I think it was an epiphany. I went to the Rising Tide Recovery Ranch in Vista. It's right next to North Coast Church on North Santa Fe. And there's a guy that runs it. His name is Buck. Out of the generosity of his own heart, he bought this 5-acre parcel. He's got some angel funders as well, but he's a contractor, and this is just his way of giving back to build and maintain this ranch for guys who are recovering from substance abuse and homelessness. And I was actually just there. It was about 2 days before the election. He called me out of the blue, and he goes, I've been seeing your videos and your stuff, and he goes, I really appreciate your heart for the homeless, and I want you to know that we're here, and I want you to know who we are and what we do. And it slows down a little bit right before Election Day.
Yeah.
You've kind of done everything you could do.
Sure.
And he said, you probably don't have time to come by. I said, no, I want to come see it. So I went by, I spent an hour with Buck, and he said something. He said, we've got a community here. When guys come here off the street, they find community because there's about 15 recovering addicts. And it just, when he said that, I realized, and it hit me, we have allowed community to exist on the street. Mm. Encampments are a community. As human beings, we must have community. You put us in a room by ourselves, we go insane, okay? We have to have fellowship of our fellow human beings. We need other people to be around. It's essential. when we allow, I'm going to call it a destructive community. In the encampments, we have people who are using, who are enabling. We have a destructive community. We cannot allow that destructive community to exist because it has a weight or gravity of its own. It attracts people in.
Sure.
If I'm the first guy on the corner of a street and I pitch my tent by myself, I have no one to be with, no one to use drugs with, no one to teach me the ways of the street.
You're more inclined to accept treatment.
Probably a lot more inclined to get off the treat or accept that treatment. But when I have 5 other residents of my encampment, and I have a guy in the encampment who supplies me, and by the way, the deputy sheriffs have pointed out to me when I've gone into the encampments, they show me who the suppliers. There's always one point of contact. The dealers find one guy or gal in every single encampment, and that's the dealer to that encampment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there's somebody to supply their habit. There's somebody to show them the ropes. We have to deconstruct that negative, destructive community in order that we're going to help the people that live there. And we need to bring them into the good community where we care about them. And, by caring, I mean, we're going to help them.
Yeah.
So I don't want to grab every person and, forcibly remove them. But we do need to begin to deconstruct the destructive community that's out there. And, there have been people that have come and they've pointed their finger right in the council's face and said, the homeless have a right to be homeless. And, you're not going to stop them if I have anything to do with it. We got to get the people who are rational about this and the families. To me, the most important thing is bringing the families in to tell their stories because the families stand behind me 100% when I talk about getting help for their kids.
Sure. Sorry, just in the interest of time, there's one thing that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address, and that's you and I in numerous private conversations. Yep. I don't think we've ever gone on the record about this, but, there's always a first time. So with Sandag, I mean, right now we're sort of many stages in. The Regional Transportation Plan, which about $170 billion, and for those who aren't familiar, in developments, improvements to the region's transportation system and transit to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's going to be many decades before we really see this thing get full-fledged. But I sort of wanted to come back to something that we touched on in a conversation where you mentioned that, there's all the criticisms of the RTP, of the transportation plan, the mileage tax.
Yep.
We could get into a number of things. But one interesting observation from you was that it's not even just that you have issues with the plan, but you feel as though the plan's priorities in transit are sort of misplaced. That there's this real sense in which the plan is investing in a system of transit, of public transit, that you believe is going to be dated very soon. And I've sort of wanted people to allow you to explain your position.
I appreciate that. So my point of view is that we need to San Diego is a technology leader of the world, a lot of technology here. We need to be the autonomous vehicle technology leader of the world. We need to build our roadways so that they are ready for autonomous vehicle technology. The problem always, when you talk about mass transit, you must start with the acknowledgement that Vista and Manhattan Island are the same size, okay? So we don't have I used to have memorized the population density of Manhattan. It's orders of magnitude greater than Vista. We're not going to be there in 2, 10, or maybe even 100 years. We're not going to have the kind of density of population they have. When you have density, you can spend great amounts of money on infrastructure, put it underground, and it all makes sense. It all pencils out. But we don't have that kind of density. So we have this thing called the last mile problem. The last mile problem is trains are great to get from Carlsbad to downtown San Diego or halfway in between. But how do we get the last 2 miles that we're going? We need a taxi cab. We need an Uber. We need a Lyft. We need a city bus. We need a bicycle. Electric vehicles, electric bicycles. In the last 3 years have revolutionized the way a lot of people are making it the last 2 or 3 miles. They weren't even a part of the conversation, these electric bikes. They weren't part of the conversation about the last mile 5 years ago. So we need to be open-minded to technology and the technological revolution that's going to solve the last mile problem. I don't oppose spending money on trains. I like the idea of being able to get downtown on a train. I don't like the idea of, a million city buses at $1.3 million a piece. That's what the new hydrogen-powered ones cost, and an enormous network that's required to maintain those buses. I would rather invest the money in the autonomous vehicle technology. In the interim, I've done the math on this. It is cheaper to supply people that are working families, low income. It's cheaper to give them script on Uber than to pay the freight on these buses.
Sure.
But there's a political argument. I'm not going to get into it, but you don't have to think too hard to know who wants a large unionized workforce versus what's soon going to be a we were afraid when people left the farms there would be no jobs. 99% or 90% of Americans worked in agriculture 100 years ago. And when agriculture went away, there was great concern. And then we were all in manufacturing. And then manufacturing left us, and we were greatly concerned. And then we had the service economy, and that's been offshored, and we were greatly concerned. And then we had the information economy, and now that's being offshored, and we're greatly concerned. We have to be looking to the future about what's next economically, and
And this plan doesn't do that.
and it really does. It does give some voice to these ideas, but I'll give you an example. When I sat on the board of directors for the North County Transit District, they wanted to spend, I think it was $12 million from Sandag to hire a 12-passenger van and take people from the Poinsettia Coaster Station. And I said, guys, it'd make a lot more sense. Why don't we go to Viasat, the largest employer in Carlsbad? A lot of those people are going to Viasat, and we had a trip goal, number of people that were going to ride that thing every day. I said, we could get to that goal a lot faster by going to Viasat and saying, let's get a vehicle. You can brand it. You can pay for half of it. And I said, the engineers that are going to Viasat, they're making a couple $100,000. They will ride that thing together. But because it's a Viasat van, they can have Wi-Fi. Google and Facebook do this in Northern California, and their employees utilize it. We should be partnering with the large employers where the bulk of employees are going to reduce that last mile problem for those people first. And they just don't think enough about those kind of innovative solutions. And it wasn't my idea. I stole it from Google and Facebook, But we need to be really innovative. We need to be speaking that our priority is to allow the autonomous vehicle fleet to thrive here. My car is capable of driving itself all the way to downtown. It speeds up, it slows down. If the guy in front of me comes to a complete stop, it comes to a complete stop. And then when he starts again, it starts again. And it steers itself. I have to keep my hands on the wheel. It's not even a Tesla. The Teslas are even better. We all know, if you have a friend that has a Tesla, we know this technology is already here,
Because not everyone agrees with that, though,
Right?
that basic premise. Because, for instance, I was reading an article where Jim Desmond, the supervisor, he agreed with you that autonomous vehicles are going to be part of our future. And he said something along the lines of, just basically that this plan is totally misplaced with its priorities. But then I talked to Tony Kranz, for instance, who's going to be the next mayor of Encinitas, and I explained to him, this idea of a future of autonomous vehicles, and he called it a pipe dream. Said it's not going to happen. Said the technology isn't there. So yeah, sort of.
I need to take him for a ride in my car.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is he driving a 1957 Buick? I don't understand.
Well, I think his point probably is that it's not going to be a form of public transportation.
Why not?
For us to commit to? Well,
why does it need to be public? Maybe it should be private.
Mm-hmm. How would that work?
Well, you understand that Uber has never turned a profit, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, Amazon was in business for 20 years, didn't make a profit, and they still don't make profit selling products. They make a profit on their computing systems, right? Uber is an investor-funded concept to own the infrastructure for the autonomous vehicle fleet that will be, in their mind, private, and they've got everybody using their product. The day that the autonomous vehicle is on the street, they want to be first to own that infrastructure, and at that point, they will be largely profitable. But that's the concept behind a lot of these, these rideshare products. It's not that they're profitable today. So, ask Google, ask a lot of these. There's a big. I tell people, and I'm not being tongue in cheek. This is true. Autonomous vehicles are going to kill people a lot fewer than inattentive drivers. That's something we have to wrap our heads around. Our cars are already preventing a lot of collisions that because we were inattentive, they're noticing and they're stopping them for us. Any autonomous vehicle is not going to, we're never going to have an autonomous vehicle fleet that never causes the death of a human being. But I truly believe in my heart that the technology will evolve to the point where it will reduce deaths on the roadway, because most deaths on the roadway occur because we're not paying attention. And I think that they will massively reduce the number of deaths. They will eliminate the need to speed. I mean, if you're not paying attention because your car's driving itself, truly driving itself, you don't care if you're getting there at 65 miles an hour or 80 miles an hour. You're going to get there faster because all the cars are going to talk to one another and they'll be deconflicted. In the morning, your car is going to tell you, hey, you should leave at 8:17 instead of 8 a.m. And if you leave at 8:17, you're going to get there at the same time or faster because we're going to have the ability to deconflict through a network. Cars are going to be able to space themselves better, make decisions about speed based on a vehicle getting on the highway a quarter of a mile ahead of us right now that we can't even see. But the network is telling us that car is getting on, it's getting up to speed. We need to slow down a little bit back here. Those are things the autonomous vehicle fleet, or maybe it's a driver-assisted fleet, are going to be able to do. But the biggest thing is to be able to send a car to pick somebody up. The most important thing is it's still cheaper today in a lot of cases to send a driver Uber with a human being in it than it is to pay for a bus that has 3 people on it that's a $1.3 million vehicle, So we need to the public doesn't need to own every bit of infrastructure for public transportation. We can provide a subsidy for low-income persons to utilize private transportation alternatives. And frankly, I think that would drive greater ridership of the train. Imagine when you get off on, if you want to go from Encinitas to downtown and you get downtown and if you're a low-income, a qualified person, that you can go ahead and get an Uber and get the last mile where you're going. Does that increase your likelihood versus having to wait for a bus? I think it does. I think it increases the likelihood that you ride the train in general. So, and, I think the cost of getting the last mile is going to get a lot less. And I think there's a lot of options if we keep our eyes open. So, but, saying that the autonomous vehicle fleet of the future is a pipe dream, I chalk it up to a fundamental difference of opinion. Because, I see the cars are already doing it. My friend's got a Tesla. Car drove him all the way to Reno, Tahoe by itself,
Well, but in terms of like this being a feasible form of public, or as we say, private transportation for people to solve the last mile problem, I mean, how close do you think we are? Like 10 years out from this being something where you can literally order an Uber, an autonomous vehicle, and it takes you where you need to go? Like how close are we to this? Like from your understanding?
Well, I'm not a brilliant enough guy to speculate on that. All I can see is it's certainly coming, and all we can say is, like I said before about electric bicycles, they're disruptive technology that literally we didn't see on the street in these kind of numbers. I mean, people had electric bikes 20 years ago, but now everybody's got an electric bike, and they're a disruptive technology for transportation. And if we're not going to be open-minded about disruptive technology, then we're not being very proactive or forward-thinking leaders. But this is what I'll tell you about the couple quick things about the regional plan.
Yeah.
Number one, the road user charge is still in it. I mean, people need to realize this.
Yeah.
They keep, pounding their fist on the table and saying, we've taken it out, but they haven't. It's still there. They keep passing a directive to staff to take it out. They're like, you have to take it out in the next 6 months. But then 6 months goes by and it's still there. They could just pass a resolution saying it's out. We have the right to do that. We have the ability to do that, but they don't do it. And because ultimately, if you were, I wish the press was paying attention in these board meetings. We have members of Sandag sitting there talking about how great it's going to be to have a road user charge. They believe in this concept. And one of them said, I don't know if I told you the story, one of them said, no, it's going to be wonderful. There will be one mileage charge to go to work and another one to go to school. And like if you need to get some laundry detergent from the store, there will be a price for that. I'm like, am I hearing this right? I'm going to have to tell the government why I'm going to the grocery store, if I'm buying this product, or if I'm going to work, or I'm going to school, or maybe, I everything I got to account to the government for what my purpose of driving is. We don't want our autonomy and our liberty taken from us in that way. We don't. The only way, there's this big question. Well, how are they going to collect the road user charge? It's 5.3 cents per mile. How are they going to collect it? How are they going to know how? Well, they put a GPS monitor in everybody's car in the pilot project. Now, everybody says, well, we haven't exactly established how we're going to come up with the calculation. Maybe it'll be on your odometer. Well, the reality is they use the GPS in the pilot project. So the only example that we have is a GPS in your car. Do you want a GPS in your car where the government can keep track of where you're going, how many miles you drove? I mean, I don't think we want that kind of intrusion in our lives. So that's something important people really need to realize is still here. It's, yes, they've said that they want to get rid of it, but they could have just actually gotten rid of it. And that concerns me. Yeah. I'll never forget that my friend Ernie Cowan, who was mayor of Escondido many, decades ago, he's long retired. He was, young mayor, and he was chairman of Sandag, and he was involved in the first Transnet tax, the first half-cent Transnet tax, 40-year tax. And he said, he believed, and it was told by staff and others, that the 78 and 15 interchange would be upgraded. People like Bud Lewis and Matt Hall in Carlsbad believed that they were going to get the I-15 and 78 interchange improvement. 40 years later, we're still waiting at a stoplight on the I-15 and I-5 and 78. They lied to us. They promised us a whole bunch of improvements we never got, and then they came back and they renewed another 40-year tax Transnet 2. Then they, Measure A was 2000? Was it 12 or 14?
I thought it was 14.
Maybe it was 14. They wanted another 40-cent another half-cent tax for 40 years. Voters turned that one down. Thank goodness, because fool us once, shame on you. Fool us twice, shame on us. And we've been lied to again and again in North County, cities like Vista, from Carlsbad to Escondido. We do not get our fair share from Sandag. We never have. We've always been treated as a redheaded stepchild, and our transportation priorities are ignored. And, I am going to be a fearsome fighter for the workers and families that live in Vista, for us to get our fair share of our local and regional transportation dollars. Mm-hmm.
We are at 1. Would you like to close, or?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I told Jordan, and I've told you, and I want to tell everybody else, I think the Coast News Group is doing a really phenomenal job. I think you guys are leading the way on your reporting.
Thank you.
We desperately need good news agencies like yours. And, I wish you had even more competition. I wish you guys were all, really successful. But we need organizations like yours to tell the public what's going on, to do things like this. I just want to encourage you, and I want to appreciate you for what you do, because you're giving us the opportunity. You're telling the story. You're telling the people what's going on.
Sure.
And, I'm learning that in order for me to be really successful as a leader, I really need to spend a lot of time, talking to you and talking to the people so that they know what's going on. It's not just enough for me to go to the council meeting and share my thoughts and opinions from the council dais and fight for what I think is right there. I need to involve the people in these decisions, and I need to educate people about what's going on. So I just appreciate you giving me the platform to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
The thing is we can't do our jobs without you, and we're better for it. I mean, I've appreciated getting to know you, and I appreciate your transparency and your forthcomingness. You know, not everybody, wants to come on a podcast and talk about the issues for an hour. I really appreciate your transparency and wanted to communicate that. So, but yeah, thanks so much for coming on, John.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. This has been another episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Barntime Productions at barntimemusic.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in and viewing the show. We'll see you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.